see myself.
Everything's switched on. Yes, you can see yourself. That's that's the whole goal,
That's
right? All right. So, just a few questions actually, and I mean, at first they started out as kind of metaphysical questions, but I think they can just be maybe more concrete, and if you wanted to elaborate, you could do that. Okay. Where did the idea of Buddhist pilgrimage come from?
So should I speak to you, or
Yeah,
should I speak to that?
you could speak to me,
That's
and that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did the idea of Buddhist pilgrimage come from?
Well, from the Buddha himself. The Buddha himself suggested that in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, he suggests that people, laymen, laywomen, monks and nuns, visit the places associated with his life, and that it will give great benefit to those who came with faith. Mm-hmm. And obviously the benefit is, perseverance, the sort of healthy disregard for hardship, because it is very difficult at the Buddha's time to go to these places. But I think in that process, it teaches you humility, it teaches you, brings you closer to not just the Buddha himself as your teacher, but also the Dhamma, the practice. And often these pilgrimages have been done as sanghas, as communities. So that in itself, to come together and travel together as a community. So the practice or the idea of pilgrimages is not just to go to the places, but to really embody the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha in that process. So the idea of the pilgrimage comes from Buddha himself. That's my feeling. That's what the texts say.
Maybe you could say a little bit more about what it means to embody the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha on pilgrimage.
I think the first thing is to be in touch with the historical Buddha. I think to go back to these places 2,600 years from the time of the Buddha allows us to touch this person who was the Buddha. I think that's very important for us to realize that he was a human being. And so embodying the Buddha in that sense is embodying this human. But then when you realize the deeper understanding of the Buddha, you realize that the Buddha is in us now. It's not just somebody outside of us. And the way Buddha manifests in us is how we can awaken to our own true nature, the moment. And the word Buddha really means to awaken. So I think to embody that awakening in ourselves is a way to embody the Buddha. But coming to historical base, the Buddha is like that. Is really embodying the Buddha in physical form in ourselves. And for people like us who come from India, and it's much even easier because he's not just our spiritual ancestor, he's actually our blood ancestor in some way, or a land ancestor. So it's even easier to embody that. And the Dharma is like that too. So the Dharma is just, at one level you can say the Dharma is the teachings of the Buddha and all our ancestral teachers. And so we embody that by reading the sutras in the places associated with the Buddha. We practice in those places. But then the Dhamma also means embodying the practice. I think the practice of whether it's using our breath as our way of coming into the present moment, whether it's walking mindfully at the places, so we can really not just picture but embody walking in the footsteps of the Buddha. I mean, this is the reality. It may be a few feet below in terms of humus or humus which is being created, earth is being created, but really walking in his footsteps. So I think the Dhamma is that way. Embodying Dhamma means practicing and embodying the teachings in practice. And then of course the Sangha is, I think in this pilgrimage at one level we travel as a small Sangha. In this trip we've had 5 of us traveling together, 6 of us for some part of it. So how to create a harmonious community within us, that is the Sangha. How to live in harmony in what are certainly not the easiest circumstances sometimes, going through bumpy roads, dusty environments, and yet to help each other and understand that if somebody needs to go slower, we all go slower, and if somebody needs a little more time, then we do that. And so we share each other's happiness and joy, love and suffering too. And I think the other thing I see with this pilgrimage is that we are connecting with a much wider Sangha. When we go to these places, it's such a great joy to meet, somebody from Taiwan, or somebody from Singapore, or somebody from, China, or from Sri Lanka, or Thailand, Burma. I mean, we've been meeting all these people right through. And for me, that's really special. You realize there's a whole Sangha family, or Buddha Sangha family around the world. And now with these new Ambedkar Buddhists, or Buddhists in India, which I've been meeting in the last few days, really feeling great happiness meeting them. I feel that we're really re-energizing the Buddha Dharma in India. So that's the Sangha for me. It's really, and then if I looked even deeper, it's like when I hear that bird or that crow, that I feel was a Sangha with the Buddha also. And I feel, oh, here we are. This is not just a human Sangha, but the Bodhi trees are Sangha. She sat with the Buddha night after night. These crows and these birds and all that, the fields. So when we look wider, we start seeing that the Sangha is embodied in the whole manifestation of moment to moment, I say, like transition through this journey.
Okay, thank you. Okay. What would you say happens or changes on a pilgrimage?
I think it's very difficult to define what happens or changes. I think for each one it's slightly different. I've been doing this journey 25 years, and I've seen all sorts of shifts in people's perception of their own lives, perceptions of external perceptions of what they see as poverty, as dirt, their understanding of beauty or wisdom, and relationships. All sorts of things are happening in changes in subtler and not so subtle ways. So I would say that the one thing that does happen for nearly everyone is that there's some sort of shift or transformation that takes place. I would say everyone who's come on this trip has had some shift. And what it is, as I said, is very different for people. Some people have gone back to their, but I also feel that the real journey, I often say, it happens when people get home. Because then you go to the familiar surrounding with a shifted lens view. And that's when the change takes place more. Because here it's a way, it's a bit of exotic, I'm not really able to put it down to, my life there. When you go back, people have made changes, like fundamental changes in their relationships, in their livelihoods, in their jobs, place they've lived, or enhanced certain things in their relationships and the valuing of what they have. I think that's been a very strong shift in really valuing what the life they have already. And I think the other thing that's happened to many people is their heart has opened. I think the development of compassion, the understanding of other people's suffering, I think that happens often. Another shift that happens is that for many people, they really come to understand the Buddha as a human being. They've known it intellectually, but to really, be in the same place where he was sleeping, or he was dying, or he was getting enlightenment, that's a really big thing. And we're very lucky because we know pretty much where the Buddha was doing this 2,600 years ago. That's a big shift, I think. And that's why I feel that everyone who is interested in the Buddha Dharma should come. Because once you can meet your teacher, or your teacher's teacher, whatever, your ancestral primary teacher, I think it's a huge blessing. But then it's like that bumper sticker I saw once in New York, says, what would the Buddha do? I have that koan quite often. I say, I have a question, what would the Buddha do? He was sitting here, maybe doing exactly the same thing. And so what would the Buddha do? And I think that's a sort of shift that happens, that we realize that this person had the same issues, little irritations, a bit of anger, a bit of jealousy, all those things but he managed to conquer them, kill them as he calls them. The only thing he killed, as he said, was my greed and my anger and my delusion. And he showed us that. So I think it's difficult to say exactly what changes, but I think, and like just this morning somebody was saying how, since she's been a child, she's never shared a room with somebody. That's a big thing to shift in one's way, to understand that you can live happily for 2 weeks with somebody you just don't know from before. And you've never done that in your life, and that's a big shift. Another dramatic, I remember a woman telling me once that it's the first time she actually smelled her pee in her life. Because she always peed in a toilet. And then she went to the fields one day, and she said, wow. And she was like blown away. You know? And, so all sorts of interesting things happened. I was telling you that day about this woman who was overcome in Sarnath, who was overcome by emotion. And the very poor woman who was cutting grass, who just saw her from a distance and just came rushing across to her and then put her arm around her and then said, you know, why are you crying? You know, you have everything. You know, we have nothing and we are happy. And you have everything. Why are you crying? And of course, this woman cried even more. And now she's coming again in January because she wants to bring her daughter on a similar journey. So I think that sort of transformation, the change, doesn't always happen immediately. It can happen 6 years later, 10 years later. Sometimes it's very obvious when it happens. But I know people change, and that's why I always think of this journey like a retreat, it's a transformative journey. I call it journeys that transform. It's not just an external tourist trip.
How would you respond to Joseph Campbell's statement, and I'm paraphrasing, you don't need to go to the Holy Land, the Holy Land is within you?
Yeah. And I think I agree with Joseph Campbell in that way, that you don't need to travel. I would agree with the fact that the Holy Land is within you. But sometimes you need to go to the Holy Land to realize that the Holy Land is in you. And I often think that you need to go to the Bodhi tree and sit under the Bodhi tree to realize that, you know, whatever it is, the oak tree at home or the redwood at home is the Bodhi tree. But you need to have gone to the Bodhi tree to find that out. Some people can find out without going, but most of us can't. Most of us need to go there and then realize, you know, the oak tree in my backyard is my Bodhi tree. But I think also what happens, when you go out on a journey like this, is that different seeds in your consciousness are touched, which lie dormant normally in your home environment. So that's why it's very difficult to realize that oak tree or the redwood tree in your backyard is the Bodhi tree, because you're not touching those seeds which are lying latent. So when you go to the Bodhi tree, or you go to the Holy Land, then certain seeds in your consciousness are touched. And once they're touched, then you can re-water them. You know how to re-water them because you know that they're there. But if you never experience that in your consciousness, then they're not easy to touch again.
It's almost a prelude to my next question, which was, what do you think who or what actually goes on pilgrimage, and what gets activated on pilgrimage?
Yeah, I think pilgrimage is actually a bit of a metaphor for life. It's having an inner journey while you're going on an outer journey. So you don't have to come always to the Buddhist places. As a Buddhist, the people coming on a Buddhist journey, I would say 70% of the people who come on this journey are very actively interested in Buddhism. I'd say 20-30% are actually have heard about this journey through other people and think it's a very good way of seeing India, rural India, and other aspects of India. So it's an interesting mix you get, which I find is very healthy. And the sort of people who come in my journeys have been a lot of Westerners. People who've actually consciously chosen Buddhism as a path of practice. But if you look at most of the people coming on journeys, they're being born Buddhists. So whether they're Japanese or Thais or Sri Lankans, etc., Burmese. So then they're coming with a greater degree of faith of some sort. It's part of their sort of system. It's a bit like a Muslim going to Mecca. Buddha said, go to the Holy Land, go to the places. So I'm going. But I think for the Westerners, I think this is an important conscious practice. So I would say people who are interested in transformation, self-development. Interesting statistic I read was in America, there's this whole group called cultural creatives. Maybe they're much more interested in travel because of self-development, education, not just sun and sand enjoyment. That's the sort of person who's coming on this journey, who's really wants to shift something in their own life. And the demography of people, we get people I've had people from age of 16 to 91. But I'd say the main demography would be about 50, in their 50s, 50, 60, 45 to 60. And I'm getting quite a young people. I'm finding young people who are quite successful earlier on. They are looking for a spiritual path, something spiritual in their life, and they're not finding. And then this is something they come to do. So it's quite a wide range. Slightly more women than men. That's the demography. But demographic. But I would say that just people who are interested in self-development, transformation, and I think it's people who are also able to look at making that shift part of themselves. You know, people who are interested in Buddhism are doing that themselves through practice, just like a sort of personal psycho. Not, I wouldn't say psychoanalysis, but it's sort of sort of therapy, traveling, but also being able to look at yourself in that process in a safe environment with other friends and other people. It's very powerful.
Thank you.
Metaphysically, like, who comes with it? No, there's no one. Who is the one coming? There's nothing.
Well, you talked a little bit about the seeds that you're awakening. That's a concept from Thich Nhat Hanh also. Talks about the seeds.
Yes.
So I guess, those positive and negative seeds are all traveling with us. And I can imagine you've seen a lot of that bubbling to the surface, both the ups and the downs during pilgrimages.
I think, but that's the challenge, and that's the pleasure of facilitating a journey like this. I love that, because I find that if I can really help people, that's great, and especially help people overcome their difficulties. So, also I'm very lucky with the people who've come. I mean, people self-select to a journey like this. It's not heavily advertised, as a tour company. So, I think the people who self-select, many of them are really good people. I mean, I really couldn't hope to meet a better set of people in the world, the people who come on these journeys. And so there's already a container for the people who have difficulties. So it's not just me. It's really the other people who are helping this person too. So if there are one or two people who are having difficulties, and then 9 of us who are pretty much okay, then it's much easier. And that's very healing for the person. So I think that's part of the ups and downs. But the seed, this is old vision about a mind-only school Buddhism from the 5th century, from Nalanda. People who, like Vasabandhu, really developed this whole idea. It's my telephone meditation. 3 bells of telephone. I'll just put it off so I can.
All right.
Oh, interesting.
Well,
I'll just tell my call. I'll just call you back if you don't mind, no?
maybe you could we could close by just saying how you started your own pilgrimage, and what's kept you going on these pilgrimages and leading pilgrimages.
So I started, the first pilgrimage I went on was with Thich Nhat Hanh in 1988, the Vietnamese Zen master, who's actually my teacher. And at the end of the journey, he said, why don't you go to the places again on a regular practice? This is what the Buddha suggested. And so from that year, I started every year going on pilgrimage. I'd been to all these places before as a child. I'd been brought up in Patna, but I'd never touched the Buddha as my teacher, as a human being, as someone who could be my teacher in this life. And Thich Nhat Hanh opened that door for me. And so even though I worked for the UN, the United Nations, and other people for 15 years, every winter I'd take my holiday and I'd come on pilgrimage. And slowly people started saying, can we come with you? And I said, sure, we'll go together. And that's how the thing started. And but I always did it in the context of practice rather than just a tour. And then in 1999, I decided to shift my livelihood from making money or making my livelihood through social development of the UN to running this as a right livelihood source. So even though I worked at the UN for another 7-8 years, I just took $1 a year from the UN, but I made this into my livelihood. And I felt that this has been a nice way of making a right livelihood. It's a way of practice, myself, it's going to the place which I love to go, and then sharing that with people who are interested, and really, I think it's a great benefit to people. So not just people who come, but also people around. I think it helps in some ways the economy of these places. We are doing some social development work in some of the villages we've been in. We're doing, trying to spread some of the books and things to the children of these areas, for them to understand their own heritage, who the Buddha was. Mm-hmm. So I think it's been a very nice development. I don't know. So far, I think it's a very nice way of making my livelihood. And, it's not. And so that's one motivation, because I need to do something like that. And the other is, I think that I feel if I can help people understand the deeper essence of the practice, and to help people become free and awakened, there's nothing better. Like this meditation we did on death today, to lose our fear of death and to understand that you can go beyond the ideas and concepts of birth and death. And people have to be ready for that. You can't just go day one to that. It takes 10 days for people to settle in, so you can do the lighter practices earlier. But as you go deeper, so I've been doing this for 25 years now, as I said, and I've been honing it to see which is the practice which is appropriate at that point. It also depends a lot on the group, who's ready for what, which are the sutras that are ready and ripe for certain times. So all that is part of the art of facilitating a pilgrimage. It's not just and so for me it seems new every time, which is very nice. I mean, it seems, for people who come, then, like, you should know, what time you're getting up or something. But I like to ask everyone, say, so what time shall we get up? What is, I know the stretch of time it'll take to another place, but I don't want to impose my idea or my itinerary. I want to come so that people feel really that it's their journey also, and it is. As we've done, I think people have felt that it's not just me saying, okay, this is what's going to happen, but I think we've been able to say, okay, let's spend a little more time here, or let's do a little less of this. So I feel that the facilitation of this has been my practice too. And if I look at pilgrimage as a practice, which the Buddha suggested, that's one element, and I think that's what I try and do every year, is my own practice. But I think the practice of facilitating a pilgrimage is also a very interesting practice. And how to dance between India, as we encounter India, in the context of the teachings of the Buddha, bringing people from a very different culture and background to in India, which can really bombard all your senses. So to be a cultural interpreter, to be a guide, a teacher, a friend, a psychologist. All these things roll into one. So that's an art. And sharing what I love, both in terms of spiritual and also cultural, historical India.
Well, thank you for bringing benefit to so many.
Thank you.